Hello everybody and welcome back to more of the 2002 grade 7 Gauss paper. We're on to question number 20, which is the last question in part B. We'll start part C in the next video. So, the word stop starts in the positions shown on the diagram. Okay? So stop is down here, it's sort of straddling the y-axis, and it's certainly below the x-axis. Okay? It is then rotated 180 degrees clockwise about the origin. So there's our origin. And this result is then reflected in the x-axis. Which of the following represents the final image? Okay. So this is a spatial reasoning question, which is fantastic. There's a couple ways you can do this one. And in preparation for this, I have actually brought a prop. So you guys can all see my prop now. It's a nice handy piece of paper. And paper is always a good thing to bring. Scrap paper is fantastic. Because you can, jot down your ideas for solutions and then bubble into the sheets here. But you can also cut, if you bring scissors, you can cut the stuff into like small nits and make yourself small cubes or tetrahedra, things like that. Or in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to draw this picture, and then we're going to, have our piece of paper, we're going to rotate it, and we're going to reflect it, and we're going to see what it looks like. Okay? So, I grabbed myself a Sharpie because in the question we're going to be reflecting in the x-axis, so that's going to involve flipping the paper. I want it to be dark enough that I can see through the paper. So, here's my y-axis. I know this is so terribly exciting for you guys to watch me draw things off screen. And stop is written S-T-O-P. Okay. So just a crude little picture like that. Okay. And that represents exactly what we're looking at. So what do we have to do? Well, we rotate 180 degrees clockwise. So from your perspective, clocks go around this way, so 180 degrees is a full rotation. Okay? And then the result is reflected in the x-axis. Well, rotating 180 degrees, while it's changed the direction of our x-axis, it actually hasn't changed where our x-axis lies. Okay? So if I want to reflect it in the x-axis, I need to flip over this line. Okay? And now, from my perspective, I can read stop, it's at the bottom. But from your perspective, if you can see through here, it's backwards P-O-T-S, so it sort of looks like pots. So that's the one we're going to be looking for. Okay? And, obviously this would be easier if you weren't trying to present it to people. You'd just have it on your piece of paper, you'd rotate it, and then you'd flip it against the x-axis, and you'd be all set. So, if we take a look at our potential answers, which one has pots with the P written backwards at the bottom? Well, it's E. So I'm going to say E is the answer. And if I want to just be confident in my prop and my physical manipulations, then we're all set. And we would say the answer is E. But if we didn't want to, if we didn't have scrap paper or a deep enough Sharpie that we could deal with, if you didn't have a Sharpie, I guess you could have held it up to the light just to see the way it was written on the other side. What we can do is we can just do this as a step-by-step construction. So I'll show you what I mean. We just grab ourselves a scrap piece of paper. We're not going to write dark and thick on this one. We're just going to draw our basic setup. Okay, so we have the x-axis, we have the y-axis, and origin here, and we have stop. Okay? So that's what we're looking at in the first case. Now we have two things to do. First, we rotate clockwise about by 180 degrees about the center, the origin here. And then we flip in the x-axis. So let's break that down into two steps. So our first step, what will it look like after that? Well, we still have the x-axis up here. Still have the y-axis down here. Or the y-axis, and this one's the x-axis. Here's our origin. But now, we've rotated, we've moved this whole thing. It's going to move clockwise. And so now we should get sort of an upside down T here, an upside down S, and this is probably very important as to how I draw it. Okay, O, and a P. Now the P will have rotated 180 degrees, so he's going to look like a D. Okay. Now this would be much easier to do and to verify on your sheet of paper, because if you're doing this with an actual scrap piece of paper, not on a computer, you're going to be able to actually sort of flip it over again and say, oh yes, stop is written correctly. Okay. The S is wrong. The top part of the start of the S should be pointing towards the T. Alright, so there we got stop. And that was the first step. And then it's reflect it in the x-axis. Okay. So here's the x-axis. We're going to reflect in that. So our y-axis and our x-axis, they don't really change. Neither does our origin. But now everything comes down. So the O is going to be directly below the other O, but he's going to be flipped. So we have an O here. The T is going to be directly below the other T, and it's going to flip. Okay. And now the P is going to flip. Now, the bulbous part is still going to be on the left. That doesn't change. But whether or not the tail of the T lies above or below the bulbous part, that is going to change. It lies above here, reflecting the x-axis. It's going to lie below. And I believe this is actually enough to solve the question, but we're going to reflect as well. S, and the S will look like that. So this should be our final answer, and let's check. That should be E, if our previous work was correct. Well, it's all about where that P is and what that P looks like. That's not it. The P is definitely not up there. These four, B, C, D, and E, have the P at the bottom. The D doesn't have it on the right side, which is incidentally the left-hand side. So B, C, and E. But B, the tail is above the bulbous part, so that's out. In C, the bulbous part is on the right of the tail, so that's out. It's got to be E. So whatever way you did it, E should be your final answer. And as I said at the start, this is a spatial reasoning style question, and they pop up every once in a while, so it's good to understand your clockwises from your counterclockwise, what reflecting in X and Y actually mean, and in upper years, reflecting in a given line, so perhaps the line Y equals X or something like that. But, of course, you'll get to that in later grades. So, that is question 20. It was interesting. I'll admit I'm not so good at the spatial reasoning questions. So, I mean, you saw how I screwed up the writing of the S in our second step. Geometry and spatial puzzles are my weak point, especially three-dimensional puzzles. But, you know, if you stick to it, if you try and think it out clearly and do, in this case, certainly a step-by-step construction, you can hopefully, rather calmly, find yourself with the correct final answer. So, that does it for Part B. We're going to move into the last 5 questions, Part C of the contest, but we'll do that next time. So I'll see you then.